This is the DRF Sports Form podcast. Here's your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Sports Form podcast. This is show number 4, being recorded on Wednesday, October 24th, 2018. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale, back with you in the Brooklyn bunker, getting ready for a little trip to Louisville for the Breeders' Cup next week. Maybe we'll try to do something fun about the Breeders' Cup in next week's Sports Form show. But for now, we're going to keep it to the usual topic, and that is the NFL. And to do so, I'm going to bring in my 2 guests who've appeared with me on every edition of this show so far. First, he is the managing editor of the DRF Sports Form and a fine handicapper in that publication and in life. He is Scott Gramling. Scott, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Great to be here again.
Excellent. And then we're going to also bring in from the planet Texas. You know him from his exploits in the gambling world on the horse side and on the football side. He once prowled the sidelines of high school football in Texas. Now he prowls the DRF Sports Form podcast. We're talking about Coach JK, Jonathon Kinchen, Mr. Friday Night Lights. What's up?
I feel like I should start off with some apologies. These Jacksonville Jaguars that I've used in my plays the last 2 weeks, I have they have now been on the no bet list. I am done with them until they can find a competent quarterback, and that was my fault for falling for that trap.
I did have a note. I was going to make fun of you. I don't think it was this week. I don't think it was as much, but 2 weeks ago, I think you gave out something like a 5-team parlay that only went wrong because of Jacksonville. And I was curious to know, now that they do appear to be a little bit of a team in turmoil, kidding aside, JK, that is something you'll do. You'll just take a team and say, I don't know what to make of this. I'm going to put them on the side for now.
No, I know what to make of it. They're just, their quarterback's not very good, and they're although Jamal Charles is a Texas Longhorn, they're struggling at the running back position with Leonard Fournette being gone. So no, it's one of those things that, like, no matter how good you are on defense, I've been a part of it from an offensive standpoint and defensive point. When you're really good at one side of the ball, and you continuously are doing your job, and you're standing on the sideline or looking up at the scoreboard, and you keep noticing the other side of the ball is not doing their job, it becomes very frustrating. You actually lose your confidence. You stop playing as well. You start trying to do too much because you feel like you have to make the difference to help the team get over the hump because the other side of the ball is not doing their part. It really, one bad side of the ball can really pull down the other side. And I think that's what's happening with Jacksonville right now.
Well, we're seeing it in real time, and the type of controversy that starts to surround when you get that tension between each side of the sideline. Scott, you can be more objective than JK, who's been the victim of this these parlay busters, the Jaguars for him. Do you agree with the assessment? Is this a team you're eager to lay off of or bet against at this point, or can you be a little more objective than him?
I kind of like the Jaguars this week. I think there's value to be found in the Jags, to be quite honest. One of the betting systems that I'm looking at for their game against Philadelphia is that teams that are coming off back-to-back games of scoring fewer than 10 points are 15-3 against the spread since the start of the 2014 season. It's 1-0 this year, and it was actually the Cardinals that were coming off the first 2 games of the year just playing absolutely horrendously. And what you end up doing is you get some value because of how poorly these teams end up performing. I mean, the Cardinals, not to use a sample size of 1, it's actually a sample size of 18 going back to the start of 2014. But the Cardinals most recently, right, they lose 24-6 at home to the Redskins in the season opener, get blown out 34-0 against the Rams, and a lot of people are just running away. The Bears then come to Arizona, and they're laying 5.5, and the Bears have no right laying more than 3 points, I don't think, against anybody in football on the road. And, sure, the Bears score late, but they only win by 2 and Arizona covers. I feel like the defense for Jacksonville is still solid enough to keep them in games. And you just have to believe they're going to get the quarterback to take care of the football. And even if they're not moving the ball with that much efficiency, I feel like the defense is good enough to cover spreads as an underdog. And I think that it all comes down to the turnovers. And the defense was so good at certain points early in the season. I mean, Jacksonville lost a turnover battle against the Jets. They were a -3 in that game, yet still won the game by 19 points. That's how good the defense is. I hear what JK is saying, and I do agree with that assessment that it tends to be contagious. The bad play on one side of the ball and, the other side feeling like they have to carry the weight. It sort of gets in kind of like a bad marriage type situation. Hypothetically, I know my wife probably isn't listening, but completely hypothetically there.
I understand.
And so I do think there's something to that, but I'm really more looking at it where I think a lot of people are running away from the Jaguars, and understandably so. And I think that is the time where you can find some value.
The point spread, I'll let you talk in 1 second, JK, but the point spread is the great equalizer potentially with that type of dynamic. Are you buying it at all, JK?
No, I agree. If I had to pick a side, I would pick the Jaguars, right? I'm just not going to play them for a while until I can kind of regain some trust. I will say this. In my opinion, when it comes to football, there's the two most important aspects, and you can see them through a lot of different scenarios, is preparation and focus. I think that those two things, I know those are hard to measure. They're kind of the intangible things that we find. It's not the stats you're going to see on the field. When you can find a team or a player or a side of the ball that is going to show an increased amount of focus and an increased amount of attention dedicated to preparation, you can sometimes see them do things that are out of character that they've been doing, right? So the Jags have been poor on offense the last few weeks. Blake Bortles got a wake-up call that he might not have a job if he doesn't get it together. And so you would think that when he shows up to the office, his focus is going to be a bit higher. His preparation is going to be a bit better. His attention to details are going to be a bit better. And when you see these professionals that can ratchet up the attention to detail, you can sometimes see a better performance out of them. I would expect Jacksonville to play much better on offense this week, and therefore the defense is going to still do their job. I can see an improvement. I'm just not going to play the improvement.
I want to talk quickly about the Eagles before we move on to some of the marquee matchups of the weekend. I was just curious, and Scott, we'll start with you on this one. Where you are with this team at this point, are we going to get a typical Super Bowl hangover season, or is there perhaps a more optimistic view one can take about their chance of rounding into form?
I think there's an opportunity here for them to round into better form. I still feel like that they are in the September part of the season, even though the rest of us and the rest of the league is in October. And the reason for that is because the quarterback didn't get healthy enough to play until week 3. Their top receiver, and Alshon Jeffrey, missed the first few games with a shoulder injury. That type of lack of preparation, and I'm going to go back a little bit what JK was saying. I know he was saying week to week, but, prior to the season, I'd love to hear what JK has to say about this as well. If you have some of your key players that aren't rolling out there and being part of the team and getting the reps in, then I think you open yourself up to the kind of play that Philadelphia has experienced right now. I mean, prior to the season, one of my favorite regular season win total prop bets was under 10 for the Eagles. I just thought that was way too high for a team that was really celebrating a Super Bowl. It seemed like all summer long, and they seem to lack the focus. And here I am taking, some of what JK's saying before. I think it's a great point. That team did not seem focused going into the season, and they were not at full strength. Now they've got the London game, then they have their bye, and I feel like it is a situation where I could see a coach like Doug Peterson being able to reset everything, really using that bye to his advantage, not just for the following week, but coming down the stretch. And I think that the fact that that division is so wide open with the Redskins at the top of it right now, and still a lot of divisional games to be played in and among all of those teams, I could see a far better focused Philadelphia Eagles team coming out of the bye.
JK, your thoughts on that?
No, I agree with that. You know, when you have a guy who misses a lot of reps during training camp, there's an opportunity to kind of be off with timing, especially the nature of the offense from Philadelphia. You know, I know they're in the gun quite a bit, and they're a shotgun RPO type team. However, I think a lot of people realize how important the run is there, and I think that that's kind of where the issues are coming from. If you look at their last game, Carson Wentz was 30 for 37. I mean, that's a damn good completion percentage. Now, the problem that is probably coming from it is they had like 48 yards rushing or 50 yards rushing. I think they're missing a potent running attack that's going to put them in manageable situations. They were 3 for 12 on third down. And if they're completing 30 of 37 passes, that means that those third downs aren't manageable. And so I think that they'll work their way into that. It's a close enough game in the last one. I think they'll be fine. I never thought they were a great team to in the first place. I think they just were fortunate last year and played well at the right time. So I think it's less of a hangover than more of them not being as good as you would think a defending Super Bowl champion would be.
Let's talk about this Broncos-Chiefs game, one of the early games, and really where we are with the Chiefs and how good we think they are. The vibes among casual bettors especially seeming extremely positive when it comes to KC. JK, we'll start with you on this one.
They're a lot of fun to watch. I love watching really dynamic schemes when they're doing a lot of stuff, and they're doing it with confidence. They're playing fast, and you can just tell they're just all on the same page, and that really, really lifts up the defense. When offensively you can be as sharp as they've been. Tyreek Hill has been amazing. I love watching him play. Having Travis Kelce being that versatile type, and then Mahomes, he's flashy and he's doing a lot of kind of highlight type things, but he's also just doing smart stuff. He's protecting the football. He's avoiding the rush. He's doing a really good job, and they're running the football tremendously as well. They're a legit 6-1 team. They've got a great home field advantage, and I think they'll keep rolling. I think we might even talk about some Super Bowl opportunities later in the show, and Kansas City is definitely a legit contender.
All right, we'll put a pin in the Super Bowl prospects because you're right. We will try to close out with doing the DRF Sports Form podcast version of what we often do on the DRF Players podcast for Breeders' Cup races, where we do a little buy, sell, hold with Super Bowl prices later in the show. But before we get to that, Scott, your general feeling about these Chiefs?
Yeah, Pete, my feeling is I would have expected them to be overvalued at this point in the season, having gone 6-1 and 7-0 against the spread, but it's just not the case. I mean, when you look at the fact that they were playing at home against a Bengals team that's good, not great, and they were laying less than a touchdown, you're starting to get the sense, and I'm exaggerating the point here, that there's no amount of points that's too much for this Kansas City team with how many points they end up putting up, because it could be a relatively close game and they can easily win it by 11 or 14 points. And I really felt like I was kind of waiting to think about taking Cincinnati when that spread got to 7.5 or 8. It just never got there. It never came close, as a matter of fact. You look at this week, they're laying 10 against the Broncos. It just doesn't feel like enough points to me. And when you look at how Kansas City has utterly dominated the division, I think that is a big factor here as well. And they've, year in and year out over the last few years, they've had the Raiders number, the Chargers, and the Broncos. And I just don't think that a team like the Broncos should be getting against a team like the Chiefs kind of thing, anything less than 2 touchdowns. And it's just surprising to me that with this kind of offensive, explosive team, those tend to usually be the teams that are overvalued. And if we go back, I know it's going back a while, we go back 11 years to that Patriots team in 2007. Remember, those lines were getting up to, they were past 20 points, some of those lines, which is, that's too much when you're looking at professional teams playing other professional teams. But I'm just surprised that the Chiefs lines haven't been climbing up where you can find value on the other side. The value has stayed on the side of the Chiefs, and I find it very surprising.
We see this sometimes in racing, and it might be a similar phenomenon, the idea of everybody being a wise guy, everybody trying to be a little too smart for their own good is how we use that term a lot of the times in racing, and it seems like that's the type of thing you're talking about here. Let's talk about one of the big games, another team that certainly is at the front of a lot of football fans' minds, and a game that a lot of folks will be watching come Sunday. This Ram-Packer matchup. Currently, the Rams, I think 9.5 isn't the last number I saw. Scott, where do you think the market is in its general assessment of the Rams, and what do you think about this game specifically?
Yeah, see, I think the Rams are starting to be a bit overvalued, and they do have that undefeated straight-up record. And they did cover pretty convincingly in San Francisco this past Sunday. I think when you look at the San Francisco cover, it was a very tough spot for the 49ers. There's a lot of trends that point to teams playing on a Sunday coming off a Monday road game, and that's the situation the 49ers were in. I think it's even more difficult when you're going against a prolific, well-coached offense like the Rams to have to prepare for them on a short week. The 49ers are already a bit shorthanded, especially at quarterback. I think that was a tough spot, and there shouldn't have been, in retrospect, a ton of surprise that the Rams won that game convincingly. Going into that game, they had been 0-2-1 against the spread in their previous 3. They pushed against the Vikings on the last Thursday of September, and then they started October favored by 7.5 in Seattle and then 7 in Denver. Beat Seattle by 2, beat Denver by 3. Seattle and Denver not very strong teams, and sure enough, end up covering those as home dogs. I feel like in this spot here with the Packers, they kind of have some of the strengths that can take advantage of the relative weaknesses of the Rams. And yeah, it's obviously tough to find that many weaknesses in a team that is the lone remaining unbeaten team in the league. But the Rams have struggled at times this year against opponents that have effective passing games. They've only played 2 games against teams with the top 10 passing offense. They gave up 392 passing yards at home to Minnesota. That was a game they pushed. And they gave up 300 yards passing to Oakland in the season opener. That was a close game at halftime that the Rams ended up running away with, one going away in the second half. I think it's an interesting spot here for the Packers coming off a bye with a prolific passing offense to be able to kind of hit the Rams in the mouth a little bit. I think the way you end up really battling the Rams, I think it's less try and grind out the running game and keep the other offense off the field. And I think it's more try and win a shootout with them, because the team that's come the closest has been the Vikings in terms of, winning a game in Los Angeles. The aforementioned Seattle and Denver games are on the road. And I think you're going to see the Packers coming out with that type of a balanced attack. And I think when you look at what the Packers have done under head coach Mike McCarthy, when they're facing defenses that allow a completion percentage of at least 64%, McCarthy's Packers have gone 43-24 against the spread, so a large sample size, and also one that really skews pretty heavily in the Packers' favor. I do like Green Bay. I like them a lot in this game, I do have to say. I think getting that many points, and interestingly, the Packers with Aaron Rodgers under center have never been this big of an underdog in a game.
Very interesting. JK, these are two teams that you have a history with, and we've talked off air and on air about how impressed you've been with what you've seen from the Rams. Is this an opportunity, as Scott's suggesting, for the Packers to take it to them with the extra time to prepare? Are the 9.5 points too much?
Like we talked about earlier, focus and preparation, I think, are probably the two most important things that just aren't measurable when it comes to football. But look, I think that they're definitely going to have Aaron Rodgers focus. Not that that's something that he typically struggles with, but he's got an opportunity off of a bye, an opportunity to get the knee healthy, to be able to have a full run of practice, a full run of mental preparation. The receivers, I think Allison and Randall Cobb will be back. I know that was a struggle for them in their previous start against the 49ers. I look, man, I think they're going to be tough in here. It's just too many points. I know the Rams are good, and I think the Rams are legit, but giving more than a touchdown to Aaron Rodgers seems like like free money. So I'm very interested in the game, and it's even more intriguing in a tease situation.
I was going to ask if you're more interested in the straight up possibility, not straight up, but the individual game perspective here, or if you'd get involved with a teaser.
Depending on your betting personality, I think the game is playable in both senses. But definitely from a teasing standpoint, where you can take it up to 15.5 or 16 or 16.5, depending on what points you select. 2 touchdowns from, in my opinion, the best quarterback from a talent standpoint and execution standpoint that I've ever seen. Yeah, I'll take the points.
So what you're saying is, when we're presumably at Churchill Downs on Sunday for opening day of their fall meet, you might have your eyes on somewhere other than just the racetrack?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually have a nice little hack, a life hack I'll offer up. I have NFL Sunday Ticket on my on my iPad. I don't have DirecTV, but if you know someone who is in college,
oh gosh, where are you going with this?
I'm serious. They can sign up for NFL Sunday Ticket for like $70, and you can have it on your iPad or your phone for only like $70. You just got to get the person who's in college to do it.
All right, let's move on to talk about this Sunday night game. Pretty interesting from a sporting perspective, pretty interesting from a betting perspective. The Saints traveling to the Vikings, line currently Minnesota as a 1-point favorite. Is this one, do you picture being out somewhere in Louisville Sunday night, JK, and having this one on the iPad?
This is the kind of game I call like kind of like an action one. Like if everything's going good for the weekend, maybe I'll just throw like a little token just to root, a little $10 here or something just to kind of root for the game. I'm a huge Saints fan. I love Drew Brees. Obviously, there's a correlation with quarterbacks and the teams that I root for. I think he's just remarkable. Minnesota's been playing unbelievable defense. It's just that Drew will always have a chance. I don't care which team Drew's playing. There's always a shot. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I think you'll learn more about those two teams after Sunday night. I don't have a lean, from a play standpoint. But if I was playing the game, I would play the Saints. And if I was in town, I would be at the Shoal Creek, our Cajun restaurant that is a huge Saints bar. They chant, who dat think they're going to beat them Saints after every touchdown. It's a lot of fun.
Scott, your thoughts on the Sunday night game?
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to this game. I think this is a couple of the best teams in the NFC. I guess they are the second and third best teams in the NFC behind the Rams. And I guess we'll find out which one of them is second and which one of them is third. I think the Vikings are severely undervalued, and it's understandable when you lay such an egg like they did against the Bills in Week 3, losing that game outright, losing by 21 as a 17-point favorite. And you guys would be able to speak better to handicapping horses, but it seems like one of those where you have to throw that one out. And almost treat it as if it never happened. It was such an aberration that I don't think it's indicative of the body of work for the Vikings. They came off that game. They pushed that aforementioned game against the Rams. But since the start of October, the Vikings are 3-0, and they're 3-0 against the spread. They're coming off a pair of double-digit wins. They won by 20 against the Jets this past Sunday. I feel like this is the Vikings team that everybody expected them to be early in the season. I think the Saints, on the other hand, I'm extremely high on the Saints. I had the Saints as my Super Bowl pick at 16-1 prior to the season. I just feel like this is a spot here where the Vikings should be laying 3 points, and the game right now is at pick'em. It's kind of been toggling a little bit between 1.5 and pick'em over the last 24 hours or so, but it looks like it's going to end up closing between +3 and -3, which to me makes it essentially a pick'em game. You look at what Minnesota has done in recent years in home games. You look at what they've done against teams that have prolific passing games, and everything here to me points to this really being a game where the Vikings can emerge victorious. They're 9-1 straight up, 8-2 against the spread over the past 10 games against NFC South teams. 6 of those 9 victories have been by double digits. You look at the fact that I know New Orleans moves the ball efficiently through the air, but you have the Vikings 4-1-1 against the spread since the start of 2016 against opponents that average at least 7.5 yards per pass attempt. All this kind of really goes to show that under Mike Zimmer, the Vikings have been able to live up to the old adage of good defense beating good offense. I'm not sure that happens nearly as much anymore, and I think an argument could be made the other way. But I think in the particular of the Vikings, they have had success against not only this type of team, but this team exactly. When you look at the fact that they played twice last year, the Vikings held New Orleans to 21.5 points per game. Just 70 rushing yards per game. They held Drew Brees under 300 passing yards in each of their victories. One was a 10-point victory during the regular season, and then the other one was the playoff win that everybody remembers, known as the Minneapolis Miracle. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about we're going to do 2 more things on the show. We're going to talk about some Super Bowl prices in the form of buying, selling, and holding, and then we'll each I'll have each of you give out a game that you're particularly interested in wagering upon. Let's start with a little buy, sell, hold. I'm seeing a lot of 3-1 on the LA Rams at this point. JK, has the love gone too far at that number?
It's a little bit short. Yeah, it's a little bit short for a second, third year quarterback. I'll sell that one.
Okay. Scott, yeah, we won't go too deep into these, but I just want at least a gut on, because, we'll be talking about these teams throughout the season, of course, but a gut from you, buy, sell, hold on the Rams at 3-1.
Yeah, sell. I think that the Rams, Saints, and Vikings are all quite close in terms of what they can do in the NFC, so I'm selling on that one.
All right. New England Patriots, your New England Patriots, Scott. The prices are a little bit more all over the map here. I'm seeing 11-2. I'm seeing 6-1. I'm seeing 5-1. I'm seeing 4-1. I'm seeing some 7-2. So I'm not sure which price to hit you with. I'll hit you with the 5-1. That seems like it's somewhere in the middle. Is that? Do you think that's justified at this point? Buy, sell, hold. 5-1.
I think it's the exact right price. I think that's a hold. I would definitely not take it at 4-1. I would seriously consider buying at 6-1. And if I can get better than 6-1, I will go so far as to say I think it would be irresponsible not to buy at that price.
I love that line. JK, how about you and the Pats?
Probably hold at 5-1. I feel the same way. A little bit more meat on the bone would be nice, but I tell you what, when it comes to these buy, sell, and holds, I just like to visualize the game they're going to have to win to get into the Super Bowl. And I don't have any problem with taking Tom Brady on the road against the Chiefs or on the road against the Ravens or something like that. I don't really have a problem with getting over that mental hump that they could win that football game.
Chiefs at 6-1, JK?
That makes a little bit of sense because you at least know you're going to get home, playoff home games. One of the things I've always liked to do with these is if you can get a nice price on a team, you'll have opportunities to wiggle around when the games show up. You'll have money line opportunities playing the team against, and you can try to do a little middling action there. So that makes a little bit of sense for a team that you would assume is going to have home field advantage and get a bye and play home games.
It might be more of a price than you would typically get on the team that you're projecting to have all those home games. That's a fair point. Is it enough for you, Scott, at 6-1 to put them in the bye category, or are you going a different direction?
No, I'm keeping them in the hold category. I really am. I still think, and I guess we'll get to it probably in a couple of minutes, but I think the Chargers pose a threat here. You look at what the Chargers have done going into their bye. They've lost only 2 games. They lost to the Chiefs and they lost to the Rams. I think the fact that the Chargers are in that division, and you look at what happened last year, the Chiefs snuck up and stole that division. I think going the wild card route is harder in the AFC than it is in the NFC because of the relative home field advantages you get in the AFC in January as compared to a lot of the top NFC teams are either playing in good weather or they're playing in domes.
All right, let's talk about these Saints that we were talking about before. I'm seeing lots of 8-1 around on various boards. Scott, your thoughts on that number?
I really do hate when people say, well, I took them in the beginning of the season and I'm sticking with them. That's not the reason I'm sticking with them. I am still buying them at that price. I feel like, and I know I'm picking against them this week against the Vikings. I think the division is down from where people thought it was going to be, especially with the Falcons. I think that's opened things up a bit for the Saints. I think that was one of the threats before the season and why I was able to get them at the 16-1 price, because a lot of people were high on the Falcons. Falcons are too banged up now to be a real threat. I really like the Saints. I still like them at this price. It's getting a little too pricey. I think if they win in Minnesota, then the time to have bought the Saints will have passed.
JK, your thoughts on the Saints at 8s?
Same idea. When I think you're looking at these, you have to ask yourself, what playoff games are they going to have to win? I have no problem taking Drew Brees in beautiful weather in Los Angeles in February, in January. That's not a problem for me. And then the Vikings, it's going to be in a dome. And so I don't have a problem with that at this point. So, and there's still an opportunity for the Saints to have home field themselves. And to have Drew Brees in the Superdome and for playoff games is plenty to feel good about. I think the one we've talked about the most, this was to be the one that I like. I'm a little bit jealous that Scott got him at 16-1,
but I'll sell them to you at 9-1. How about that?
2 more teams we're going to talk about, gentlemen. Los Angeles Chargers. It's so hard not to say San Diego. Los Angeles Chargers. JK, we'll start with your thoughts on the Bolts.
They'll be a sell at any price as long as number 17 is playing quarterback.
What? What is? I'm not aware of this theory of yours. We're gonna have to pause here for a sec.
I'm just not a fan. I think he's serviceable. I don't think he's elite. I don't ever see him being able to overcome a road game against a good team in the playoffs when it matters, let alone in chilly weather. I've just never been impressed by Phillip Rivers, and so not at any price. Don't get me wrong, but no, he's an absolute sell for me.
Harsh stuff from the coach, Scott. I mean, I've been impressed with Rivers over the years, and have felt that but for circumstances, he would have the Super Bowls that Eli Manning has. What are your thoughts on him as a player and the Chargers at 16?
I think there's a lack of leadership generally in Los Angeles with the Chargers, and I do think that Rivers is partially to blame for that. I think the great quarterbacks not only put up the fantasy numbers, but also win the tough games. And I think the toughest game, the real gut check game that the Chargers have had over the past calendar year is when they went into Kansas City. It was a Saturday night, actually, last year against a Chiefs team that had been reeling a little bit. They had lost 4 of their last 5. It was almost a pick 'em game. I think the Chiefs closed as a 1-point favorite. and the Chargers were rolling. They had put together a lot of wins. It was a big game. They lost 30-13. I think, again, I know I'm talking about it like it's a one-game sample size, but that really kind of expressed to me what kind of culture, I guess, that seems to be evident with the Chargers. I mean, that was a cold weather game that they had to go into, and they fell flat. And that really was a game that could have given them that the division. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm contradicting what I said before. I think the Chargers can be a menace in the regular season here to what the Chiefs' chances are. It's just why I didn't like the Chiefs' price, because I could see a scenario where the Chargers end up winning that division. But I really am with JK on this, where at the very least, I guess I'll say it a bit more kindly, at the very least, this leadership, the coach and quarterback, has yet to prove that they can step up in a big game. And I think because of that, they are a tough team to buy. I wouldn't sell them at this price. To me, they're a hold.
All right, fair enough. Let's talk quickly about the Vikings, and then we'll get to a betting thought for the upcoming weekend. There's some variance in this price on the Vikings, but I'm seeing 12-1 generally. Scott?
Yeah, 12-1 I think is a good buy. I really do. And I'm looking at it right now where if I could get the Saints at 8, I'm setting aside that I have this. If I get the Saints at 8 and the Vikings at 12-1, I like having that pair of teams, and that essentially ends up fading the Rams. And, if all of them were equal price, I would take the Rams at this point. But I don't think the Rams are that much better than the Saints and the Vikings. And I think JK pointed something out before, right? You have a young head coach and you have a young quarterback. Combined and even individually, they have 0 postseason wins in their careers. You have other teams that, with the Saints and Sean Payton and Drew Brees. I know Kirk Cousins hasn't been a mainstay in the playoffs, but, that team certainly has been up there in the last couple of years, suffered the heartbreak and the Blair Walsh miss. But, I just think the experience of the Saints and the Vikings helps to close that gap between them and the Rams. And I like each of them. I really like pairing the two of them and kind of going against the Rams, a kind of 2-on-1 situation. It's
an interesting angle, really. You get the two teams combined for a better price than the one team who's the team you want to pick on anyway. I see the logic. JK, a quick thought on the 12s about the Vikings before we close out this edition of the DRF Sports Form podcast with a couple selections.
I like the Vikings. I think the Vikings are good. I would still lean towards, if I had to play one, I don't disagree that you can't play both. I would still lean towards the 8 with the Saints. I think the addition of Eli Apple is going to be very helpful for the Saints. That's one of their weaknesses, obviously, is the back end. And for whatever reason, it's been like that for a really long time. But if they can continue to play as well as they're playing on offense, then the defense will kind of get lifted up from there. But back to the Vikings, I think it's a viable number if you feel if you're interested in it. I would prefer to go with the Saints, but I definitely think it's a viable number. I think the Vikings are really good. They're really good on defense. I think Kirk Cousins is very underrated. I think their receivers are good. I'm a big fan of Stephon Diggs. So I think that they're definitely a viable option at 12-1.
I'm going to put your feet to the fire, though. Are we buying or are we holding for you? I can't quite tell.
I'll hold.
Okay.
Just because of how interested I am in the Saints, and we're gonna learn a lot more about the Rams if they really get after the Packers this weekend, which I don't think they will. But if they do get after the Packers, I think it's a real statement game for them that I don't think will make the 3-1 a buy, but makes the 3-1 make a lot more sense on the Rams.
All right, let's talk about a game to bet from this weekend. JK, we'll start with you. What are you the most interested in?
I'm interested in using there's two teams I want to use for sure in teases, and if it's a 2-team tease, that's fine. I'll look for some other options, but one of them is the Miami Dolphins on Thursday night. You can tease them up to 14.5. You're getting two touchdowns against a team that and the Houston Texans that I still don't think is very good. I think their offensive line play is extremely poor. I think that Deshaun Watson is a talented player, but very overrated. And I think that you're going to get some extra value from the fact that you're going to get a little Brock Osweiler in your life. And I don't think that's really like an awful thing. You know, he's came up under Peyton Manning. He knows how to prepare. And you're going to get 2 touchdowns with a team that was at one point undefeated, has a good run game. I think that they'll be just fine when you get those extra points. And then obviously the Packers teasing them up to 2 touchdowns at 15 or 16 and a half. So I'm going to use those 2 teams. I'll take a look at the Kansas City Chiefs. And teases usually, you can take a tie, but I'd like to be able to tease them down to -2.5 rather -3 with the Chiefs. So we'll keep an eye on that line to see if we can round out a 3-team tease with them.
Scott, where are you most interested in going this weekend?
You know, I feel like a little bit of a bully here where I keep beating up on the Ravens. I'm going against the Ravens again. I know I went against them last week and taking the Saints, and you can make a case I got a little lucky there. But even if Tucker makes that extra point, that game goes into overtime, and the Saints are the underdog, and I'm a little better than 50-50 there. But I'm a bit surprised, I have to be honest, that it's the Panthers at home that are getting a couple points here. I think the wrong team is favored. I feel like the Panthers, for whatever reason, continue to kind of be a bit undervalued. And Baltimore, to me, continues to be overvalued because of the lopsided wins that they've had. You also look at Baltimore's record in October games, 5-11-1 against the spread in October road games since the start of 2011. Also, there's a couple of pretty solid coaching trends with Ron Rivera. Carolina's 9-4 against the spread under Rivera when coming off an upset win as a road underdog. Harbaugh, Ravens 3-7-1 against the spread, coming off a home loss by fewer than 4 points. I just feel like, you look at what Baltimore has done. Baltimore is a type of team, very generally speaking here, that tends to really amp it up for familiar foes. Even in years where they're a bit down and the Steelers are up, they just drag the Steelers into these street fights. And they kind of do the same thing with the Bengals oftentimes as well. And then, of course, everybody just beats up on the Browns. But, you look at Baltimore against over the past 3 calendar years, they're 2-8-1 against the spread against NFC opponents. And, I think these trends are somewhat significant here because they do start to paint a picture of a team like the Ravens that has been more successful than not in recent years. It's kind of surprising to see that, they do have all these trends going against them. And on the flip side of that, Carolina is 6-0-1 against the spread over its past 7 games against AFC opponents. So, I like the Panthers here to win outright. I think they're a well-coached team. I do think Baltimore's well-coached as well. But being at home, teams that are, to me, seem evenly matched. And if anything, I would have the Panthers favored by a point or 2 if they were on a neutral field. I'm taking them to win it outright, and I'm not even going to really bother taking the points. I'm just going to get the little bit of extra juice there on the money line.
Lots of good info there. That's the type of info you're going to find in not only the DRF Sports Form, but also the Platinum Sheet and the Best Bets product, all of which you can purchase at foxsheets.com. Scott, the managing editor, a regular contributor, lots of other great content in there, can really help you point you in an actionable direction, or sometimes just by thinking about a stat you might hear, a trend you might hear, might trigger something in your own brain about how you feel about a certain game. I know I like to look at all 3 of those products before finalizing my bets for the weekend, and you should too. And that is all the time we have on this edition of the DRF Sports Form podcast. Scott, thank you very much for your contributions. Look forward to catching up with you again next week.
Thanks a lot, Pete. Really appreciate it.
JK, same thing. We've got more podcast stuff coming up. Breeders' Cup for the DRF Players podcast. We should have some special content next week. Maybe we'll even sit down with our friend Matt Bernier and talk about a couple days of racing. We'll also have to find some time in Louisville to talk about next weekend's slate of NFL games. You have a closing thought for us today, JK?
Absolutely. I think it's interesting for our sports bettors out there that the Breeders' Cup has announced some head-to-head matchup types of wagers that are going to be a little bit more along the lines of the 50-50 proposition that we're used to playing in sports. So when those come out, check them out and tune into our racing podcast if you don't happen to already listen to that. Maybe we'll give you some ideas of some things you can do that might fit a little bit more of your betting personality if you haven't dove into the horses yet.
I'll tell you what, JK, maybe if we don't get to it with Mr. Bernier, and with 14 Breeders' Cup races, we probably won't. Maybe we'll do a little one-on-one segment after we talk about NFL on this show next week. Why don't we do just a few minutes on those head-to-heads that are going to be available at the Breeders' Cup? Maybe we can bring a few sports fans into racing for Breeders' Cup Friday and Saturday. You think it's worth a shot?
Absolutely. That'll be a ton of fun.
Excellent. All right. There you have it. Thank you again, Scott. Thank you, JK. Thanks to producers Craig and AJ. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. We will be back next week. And if you're betting this weekend, I hope all the bounces go your way.